So welcome to Bridging the Research and Policy Gap, one tweet at a time. As Ann and Libby said, Population Reference Bureau works to inform people around the world about population health and the environment. We also empower individuals and groups to use this information to advance the well-being of current and future generations. You can sum up our work in 3 words: inform, empower, and advance. Today's webinar draws from our well-known Communicating Research Through Social Media module of the Policy Communication Toolkit, which is a resource created by PRB as part of the USAID-funded Policy Advocacy and Communication Enhanced for Population and Reproductive Health project, which is quite a mouthful, but you can more easily call it the PACE project. The social media module is actually one of 9 modules, including our recently launched 2019 Youth Leaders module, that consolidates 30 years worth of tools, materials, and approaches that PRB has used to train researchers to communicate with policy audiences, and in turn bridge the gap that often lies between research and policy. After today's webinar, I do encourage everyone to check out the PACE Policy Communication Toolkit to see which modules may be useful to you, including the full presentation and resources for communicating research through social media. Modules can be downloaded for free and are available in English, French, and Spanish. So for today's webinar, it'll be mostly just the highlights from the module because I want to ensure we have plenty of time for questions. If you are new to social media and really want to deep dive into how to use major platforms, particularly Twitter, I do recommend you look through the full module slide deck available on our website. Today we'll be going over first the why and the what of social media, how to use platforms differently, generating engagement, the etiquette and influence on social media, monitoring and evaluation of your social media activity, and then lastly, 10 best practices to keep in mind when posting. So, I always like to start this presentation with a few quotes to remind us why we need researchers on social media. Obviously, everyone who is tuning in today is interested in this topic, but it's also easy to log on to Facebook, Twitter, etc., and become distracted by what's on there or overwhelmed by the magnitude of conversation. So if that happens, I want you to come back to these quotes for motivation. The first quote from Harvard Business Review reminds us that social media is no longer something that can be ignored, but rather a critical communication tool for academics. It's also a way to gain a competitive edge within your field. The second quote from Hopkins Bloomberg Public Health Magazine is a bit longer, but it explains and asks for more public health professionals to become social media savvy, not for their own gain, but to better serve the public accurate content when so much misinformation exists on the web, especially with health and well-being. The last quote is from the 2017 Population Association of America conference, where Wendy Manning spoke about social media for social science. She emphasized that there isn't just a need for researchers to be using social media effectively, but that researchers actually have a responsibility to the public to share their scientific knowledge. So, how many people out there are researchers responsible for on social media? I'm just kidding, but we do love this question at PRB since we're the ones who count the world population every year. In terms of social media, the latest figures from Hootsuite and We Are Social estimate that more than 3 billion individuals use social media every month, and more than 4 billion individuals are using the internet. More or less, this vast social media universe can be categorized into 6 groups: publishing, sharing, messaging, discussing, collaborating, and networking. Many platforms cut across these categories, especially the popular ones like Facebook and Twitter. Not everyone is using all of these platforms, nor are they even using them in the same ways. Social media preferences and customs differ across countries, communities, professions, etc. So keep that in mind for today's presentation, as well as when you're interacting with others online. Okay, so first off, we're going to go over platform differentiation for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Even with the proliferation of new social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter remain popular, especially in the United States. It's likely that some of you are already on one or more of these platforms. When thinking about how you will use social media as a researcher, you should consider how you can use different platforms to get different results. First up is LinkedIn. If you already have an account, are you actually using it regularly? LinkedIn has established itself as the professional social network platform. It's standard practice nowadays for recruiters and HR to review your LinkedIn profile at some point during the job application process. An active LinkedIn account with examples of your work and engagement will make you stand out and could open new opportunities. As I've listed on the slide, LinkedIn has several uses other than a great way to keep your CV up to date. You can see from the example from one of our researchers here at PRB that even posting about your work anniversary can generate engagement and get people excited about who you are as a professional. Facebook's often in the news, and I think people think of it as the platform that everyone loves to hate. But even if your Facebook feed is primarily filled with cute animal videos, you can still use it professionally. It's likely that some of the people you're connected with on Facebook are your biggest supporters, your friends, and your family. Sharing news and research accomplishments with them is a great way to loop them into your professional life. And it's also a great way to challenge yourself to put your work in its most understandable terms, especially to that one relative who just can't remember what you're researching. You can also thank them publicly for supporting you throughout the course of your career, because everyone likes to hear that. Other than sharing, I also recommend Facebook for its group feature, which can connect you with new opportunities or people around the world. For example, on the screen you can see there's a Facebook group called Research Scholar Alerts that posts daily and has 52,000 members. They post funding opportunities, seminars, many great opportunities for you to get engaged. The last platform we're going to discuss before diving into general best practices to use across platforms is Twitter. And this might actually be the most important for you all as researchers. Even though Twitter has a reputation for allowing too many unfiltered thoughts to roam free, it's actually considered the social science platform of choice. Why? Well, Twitter is distinct from Facebook and LinkedIn in that it does not have a timing algorithm. This means that posts you are seeing are happening in real time. They aren't served to you at a later date. Breaking news, or breaking research for that matter, can be quickly shared and seen by thousands of people. This is a great way to stay up to date on what's happening in your field of study. Twitter is also considered a microblog, allowing people to chronicle their lives or their research process in short posts. It's easy for people to respond to these types of posts, as you can see from the example that provides feedback on a research paper one of our researchers worked on here at PRB. Additionally, Twitter has less barriers, since you don't have to know someone in person to follow them. This makes it easier to capture the attention of new people, or even directly contact someone you wouldn't normally have access to, like a journalist or a policymaker. Social media is also ever evolving. Now that more people have smartphones, in-person events are also usually covered online live. Covering an event or conference using Twitter is a great way to establish yourself as a source of information on a particular subject, especially if the event has limited capacity for attendance. Lastly, even if Twitter seems intimidating to you now, it's actually rather quick, easy, and intuitive to use if you log on and experiment a bit, making almost anyone, anywhere in the world able to use it. So, now that we've talked and gone over the 3 basic platforms, we're going to go over some best practices for engagement, social media etiquette, and evaluation. To start with generating engagement best practices, it's important to think about visuals. Social media is a very visual medium of communication. So posts that include some sort of visual usually generate more engagement. For you all, this is a great opportunity to share graphs, charts, and data visualizations of your research. However, make sure to keep them simple enough to read or to capture someone's attention, especially since many people are looking at social media on their phones. You can see in the example of the map that you can tell it's the United States and would probably catch your eye or your interest. If you're struggling to get people to engage with your research on different platforms of social media, you can try asking them questions, whether by posting a public poll, which is a feature included in many networks, or asking a few individuals publicly by tagging them. Asking a question is also a great way to generate interest in a link. Where can people go to find out more? Varying your posts and not being afraid to try new ways of conveying the same information will also make your profile stand out and help you better understand what people like. If you're including a photo, a question, a link, you can try something, and if it's successful, I recommend trying it again. Current affairs and news updates are also always being shared on social media, especially on Twitter, as we discussed, with breaking news and breaking research. If you see a current issue that connects to your research, don't be afraid to provide an evidence-based perspective on it and link to the original article. Lastly, if you're having difficulty getting new followers, participating in live online events, or covering an in-person event online is a great way to generate attention to your name and profile, since people interested in the same topic will be online at the same time. This will let people know you have something worthwhile to share and promote reciprocity among those attending. As you can see from the second example, even tweeting the picture of a meeting can generate high engagement. So here are two more examples and a few more recommendations for engagement. So when you're posting, I want to remind you to always think about your audience, whether it's based on the platform or who you really want to understand the information. In the example on the left, Beth is speaking to fellow female researchers, and she was rewarded for it with more than 207 likes, even though it's a very simple statement. Next, you should also consider if you're using social media just for awareness of your research, or you want followers to do something, like actually read it. Including a call to action, whether it's asking for feedback on your work, providing a link for someone to click, or generating a discussion is also a good way to boost engagement and generate interest. Social media favors brevity, but it's also important for you as researchers to remain accurate, which can sometimes be a struggle. Twitter is probably the hardest to write for because it does limit you to 280 characters. To overcome this, you can break your research findings into several posts or include a visual to further demonstrate and explain your point. As you can see in this second example, Carolyn broke out her research into 3 main points and made it easy for someone to click through and understand what she was talking about. One of the most common problems that I do see with people using social media that is a major barrier to engagement is when people post and then abandon their account for 5 months. I know some of you in the audience are probably guilty of this, which is why you're listening in today. Staying consistent with your frequency of posting will let your followers know that when they check in, you will still be there. This could be as simple as posting once a week on LinkedIn or tweeting once a day. It's also easier to fit in 5 minutes once a day than 35 minutes once a week. Make it a habit to check in daily. Lastly, before we move on from engagement, I want to emphasize that you should always try to be yourself on social media. Share aspects of your personality with your followers. This is why individuals often have more success than institutional or organizational accounts, because the connections and conversations feel more personal. Be the person who is a global health research expert, but also loves science jokes, is an avid runner, and paints in their spare time. I should note before we move on that you should never compromise your personal safety for the sake of engagement. If you're uncomfortable by a post or are experiencing harassment, many platforms have steps that you can take to block that user and protect yourself. Okay, so now that we've gone over best practices for engagement, let's talk about etiquette on social media and what it means to be an influencer. The basic rule for personal etiquette is to always, and I can't emphasize this enough, read over your post at least 3 times, hence the 3 always, before clicking send. You should get rid of typos, rephrase something that's confusing, make sure to check that your link works. If you're unsure if you should post something, a good rule of thumb is to think, what would this look like on the front page of the New York Times? If it doesn't look good to you, then don't post it. The basic rule for interpersonal etiquette is to act similar to how you would in person with those online. If someone asked you a question in person, would you completely ignore them and walk away? It's important to take time to engage, even if it's to say thank you or let someone know you don't know the answer. Maybe you can connect them with someone who does. Honesty is always a good policy, especially if you make a mistake. One way you can engage with others on social media is through direct messages, or known as DMs, which can allow you to privately connect with other users. You might want to do this if you want to ask a question or reach out to an individual with a specific link. If you are sending a direct message, please make sure that it's relevant to the person. Do not spam them if they don't answer, and again, always say thank you if they do. You might be surprised at how far a courteous message will get you, especially to someone you don't know. So, moving from etiquette to influence. What do you do if you're trying to direct message an influencer? Or maybe you want to know what an influencer is before I get into that. That's fine. Simply put, an influencer is someone who's influential. They could be influential in the real world, like a journalist or policymaker, or they could be mostly influential on social media because of the connections they possess there. Chelsea Polis, in the example, is a great example of a global health research influencer, and she has more than 14,000 followers. However, it's good to know that an influencer does not necessarily have to have a large number of followers, but that those that follow them listen when they say something. They are thought leaders who have likely used the best practices we've discussed thus far to build their engaged communities over time. We have several researchers at PRB that have around 200 followers, but when they post, they get high engagement because people know that there's someone they can depend on for engaging information. If you do want to contact an influencer because you think your work is relevant to them, you'll be more effective if you build a connection with them first. You can do this by following them or sharing and commenting on their work. Use the same practices you would for face-to-face networking. So, now that we've gone through best practices, etiquette, all the platforms, we're going to talk a little bit about monitoring and evaluation. Just like in your research, you'll be more effective on social media as a researcher if you set goals for yourself, stay organized, and monitor and evaluate your results. If you are new to social media, you can start with small goals, like posting regularly. But if you have more experience, I would recommend to start experimenting with new types of posts or reaching out to new audiences. You may want to even stay organized by putting your goals into a spreadsheet, listing people you want to engage with, and keeping track of metrics. If you are using Twitter, there is a feature called Twitter Lists that will allow you to keep track of and categorize profiles of interest to you. You can make these lists public or private, and you also don't have to be following an account to make them. For measuring, you might have to add up totals yourself because some platforms don't provide comprehensive analytics to individual accounts, only to organizational accounts. However, the one platform that will give you a ton of data is Twitter, so make sure to click on and check out the analytics section. At the end of the day, it's really up to you to decide what metrics you find meaningful, but generally engagement is a good place to start. Engagement, likes, retweets, shares, comments, etc., is when someone interacts directly with your post. This shows that your content was interesting enough to them to result in an action. You can use these numbers to inform how you are using social media in the future, but you can also use them as evidence for your funder or your employer. Metrics, especially engagement, are useful ways to show that your research is of note to people. So, lastly, before we move on to questions, I want to end with a list of 10 best practices to keep in mind when posting. These draw from what we've gone over already, but it's a simple list that I want you all to have in mind as you embark on your social media journey. The 10 best practices are: be yourself and share anecdotes. Make social media a habit. Think before you post. Tailor your profiles. Have meaningful conversations. Visuals. Be concise. Write for anyone. Engage and respond. And then lastly, look at the data and analytics. These are simple reminders, but they will get you far if you follow them. So I'm excited to take questions now because I know there are a lot out there, especially because social media is complex and there are so many platforms. But if you want to learn more about PRB and our work, you can visit our website at prb.org. That's also where the Policy Communications Toolkit is housed. Additionally, since we're here for social media, please follow us on there as well. Our handle is the same across most of our platforms. It's at PRB Data, except for LinkedIn, where it's Population Reference Bureau. After today's webinar, if you still have questions or want to chat directly with one of our awesome social media savvy researchers, you can email me at sperlato@prb.org, and I'm happy to connect you or answer your question. Thank you again, and I'm excited to take questions.
Thanks, Sydney. So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to just let the questions come in. And again, supportive space, so please ask any question that you have, and we want to hear from you. I'm going to start, though, with a question that I have. In your presentation, you recommend advocating for issues related to your research. And my experience is that sometimes researchers are uncomfortable being advocates because it conflicts with their neutrality as researchers. And if you're a researcher on here and you disagree with me, please also weigh in on the chat box. But Sydney, what's your advice on balancing the two in a social media feed?
Yeah, this is a great and very common question that I often hear from researchers. And ultimately, the decision is up to you about how much you want to be an advocate. But I will say, over the past few years, with both the rise of social media and kind of the changing political environment around the world, staying impartial is increasingly seen as not speaking out on issues that really need to be spoken out and results in less effective uptake of research sometimes. So there are ways to balance being an advocate and kind of maintaining that academic neutrality and accuracy. And I can say the best way to do that is applying the same rigor that you apply to your research to posting about social media. So that means checking your sources. If you're sharing an article, like checking where that article is coming from. Speaking for yourself rather than speaking for others. So don't make general statements that maybe don't apply to you, and always provide a link to more information if you are making a statement. And I think, again, just adding a little more, showing the advocate side of you is a great way, again, to kind of show the whole of you and that full personality that people want to interact with, and also is a tool for your organization. If they are unable to speak out on certain issues, allows you to connect your organization or your institution's research with issues that are being discussed in mainstream media.
So the next question, we actually have a couple questions from Jessica, who manages the LinkedIn company profile for the academic journal Sexual and Reproductive Health Matters. I'm going to start, Jessica, with actually the second question that you asked, which is, Sydney, do you have a list of Twitter profiles of policymakers or advice on how to find them?
So I don't have a Twitter profile on policymakers, mostly because from my institutional perspective of running the PRB accounts, that's not something that I directly usually reach out to. I ask our researchers to, and a lot of those are already existing partners on projects that we have. I'm sure there is a list that exists out there. I will say that the Twitter search bar is an extremely powerful function that is often underused. You can search topics and you can kind of weed through and find out policymakers that are out there, and you can also see public lists that people have created. I would guess that probably if an organization has a list of policymakers, they're probably keeping it private, just so it doesn't kind of seem like they're tracking people. But I would search and see if there are any individual accounts out there with global health policymakers or listed on there.
So the next question is from Silvia from Global Health Strategies, and she's wondering how you use tracking and monitoring tools to inform your changing social media strategy. And keeping in mind that we have a mix of communications and research folks, Sydney, maybe you could talk about if you're an individual, not necessarily an organization, and you want to become a research influencer, how could you use free tracking or monitoring tools to help increase your influence?
Definitely. So again, if you are an individual, probably the place you want to start is what's available to you on the social network of choice that you're using. So Twitter analytics or looking at your Facebook likes and that sort of thing. That will kind of let you know if you post something and nobody cares, or if you post something and you generate a lot of engagement. You can keep that in mind for the next time you post. Think about what was different. Again, if you aren't using a sophisticated kind of monitoring tool, starting with Excel is a great way, especially if you're trying to build that habit of posting daily or weekly. If you put your tweets or your posts in an Excel sheet and then kind of look at what's doing well, what's not, that can also help you kind of modify. And then a more sophisticated way of testing what works and what doesn't would be to take the same information and put it out there in two different formats, and kind of test one difference between those two posts. So maybe you post the same tweet, but it's at two different times and you get more engagement at one of the other times. Or maybe you post the same link, but you write the post differently and you see that one way of writing is more significant, or you include a picture. So that's a great way too to kind of see what works well across your platforms and monitor what's going well.
So we
And
have
I
a lot
will
of
say, or one more thing, sorry. A free tool that you can use is Hootsuite does have a free option if you want to get into more sophisticated monitoring and scheduling. It's a great place to start.
Thanks, Sydney. And yeah, I agree. Hootsuite does have a really great free option, so highly recommend it. We have a lot of great questions coming in. I do have one, though, that is actually from me that I'd love to ask you as well, which is regarding emojis. Are they appropriate to use in a post to help describe your research findings? Yes, no, why? And I'm sure that we have some opinions from everyone who's joining us, so please weigh in with your ideas as well.
Yeah, emojis are great. I definitely say they're fine to use with your research findings as long as it's with moderation. Like, I don't want to see a link with 25 emojis following it and no explanation. That's a little much. But the reason emojis are popular on social media in the first place is the fact that social media is limited in the amount of tone that can be conveyed because you're just writing a statement. There's no verbal context. And so emojis can provide that important context. Are you making a joke? Are you being serious? Do you want to appeal to a certain audience? And I think too, like, especially maybe you're trying to reach youth with your research, that emojis, GIFs, those sorts of things will appeal to them more than just a simple statement with a research graph. So that may be a way to reach those new audiences. And I saw even the other day on social media that places like the National Resource Defense Council have an emoji in their Twitter handle. They have like the world globe to show um, kind of that their work is for everyone.
So we have another question from Idris, who's asking what your take is on using Twitter ads. So is it better to talk directly to social media influencers about posting your work, or is using Twitter ads quite effective? So I guess this is more of a question for the comms people that we have on.
Mm-hmm. Twitter ads can be great. I will say Twitter, if you're trying to reach a specific audience, Twitter is a little bit harder to target. Like, say you want to reach youth in this country who are talking about X topic. Twitter is hard to target because it requires users to provide less information about themselves. It's a little more anonymous. So for reaching specific geographic groups and that sort of thing, Facebook or LinkedIn might be better because people are providing more data about themselves to the platform and thus they can target better. Um, In terms of using a Twitter ad versus reaching out to an influencer, it would really depend at the end of the day your goal. Um, if you really want to generate awareness on something and make sure a lot of people see it, a Twitter ad might be the right route because you can reach those new audiences. But if there's an influencer who you really know works with your target group of people and has followers that you're interested in connecting with, then reaching out to them is probably a good method because you'll know that if they do post it, those people that you want to see the post will probably see it.
Going back to a question from Jessica, she had asked, what's the best way to use a company profile on LinkedIn to share research? So again, she's asking from the perspective of managing a profile for an academic journal. But Sydney, I know PRB shares quite a bit of research as well, so maybe you could also speak to your experience sharing an institutional research.
Yeah, definitely. So, PRB, we generally share all of our new research and products that we produce on our LinkedIn because it is a nice kind of repository of all the current activities, topics that we're working on. And if people are interested in seeing the latest PRB work, they can click through to our LinkedIn account and it's all right there for them. I will say that in terms of sharing research, getting engagement and that sort of thing would be really great for actual researchers to be sharing it because it reinforces the fact that there was a human behind the study. They worked really hard on it. Maybe you can provide insight on what the research process was like, and that will kind of create a more interesting story for people to click through and learn more about what you're posting.
Thanks, Sydney. So Lucy's got a question for both you and for the audience members, which is great. Thanks, Lucy. So she's been tweaking who she follows to get the most out of Twitter, people versus institutions. Can you share your thoughts on the topic of who to follow?
This is a really good question. And I think that it really depends, again, on who you're trying to reach, who's your audience. I agree that um, following individuals is a really great way to get more engagement because you will see that when they post something, generally they're more successful than an institutional account. I know when PRB posts, we do ask our researchers to share, especially if they worked on a project, because even people who are interested in the work of PRB, we work on a lot of things, but a researcher that's working on a specific topic can better reach those individuals and those groups that are interested. Um, I think also in terms of who to follow, journalists increasingly, I've heard a lot, are are good to connect with and follow because you can kind of again see what people are writing about, especially if you're trying to use social media as a way to better get your research out there. So maybe you follow journalists and you see that one is always writing about this, then you can reach out to them, sort of thing. Um, and as I mentioned before, a great tactic for doing that is to put people in Twitter lists. So maybe you have a list of journalists, maybe you have a list of like researchers, another list of policymakers, and maybe people who, work on reproductive health in South Sudan, that sort of thing. And you keep them categorized and stay organized so that you can check in and see who, what they're talking about, and if it would be valuable to reach out to them. And again, I think maybe after this webinar is over, we can kind of, as a group, put together some general global health lists on Twitter, since I'm sure everyone has their own people or hashtags to follow, and we can kind of put that together as a group and share the collective knowledge of everyone who's tuning in right now.
So next question comes from my co-chair, Lippy. Tweet chats or Twitter chats come up all the time between organizations and global health and development. And I notice a lot of familiar names joining us today that I've seen in tweet chats. Sydney, do you think that tweet chats are an effective way to share research or network?
This is a really great question, especially since if anyone has ever organized a Twitter chat, it does take a lot of kind of promotion and coordination beforehand, and you want to make sure you're using that time valuably. I think that tweet chats between just institutional organizations are less effective, and that really the focus should be getting on individuals to loop in their research or their perspectives. And I would particularly love to see more tweet chats with maybe youth leaders and that sort of thing. We have seen more effectiveness when engaging kind of our country partners, our youth leaders in those countries, because they are the ones who are on social media and they're able to broadcast, connect their perspective with a particular research product or piece of information.
And we've got a lot of questions coming in from the comms side, which is great. I do want to ask one that is a little bit more relevant to any individual researchers we have, which is, do you have suggestions for well-known research hashtags to use? And what mix should you aim for? Should you be looking at research-specific hashtags versus topic-specific hashtags, like if your research is in family planning, or we've got an oral health advocate on here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So again, when you're looking to use hashtags in your post, I again recommend the Twitter search box is really powerful. It will also kind of when you search one hashtag, you can look at posts and see what other hashtags people are using in relation to that. There's also a tool called Hashtagify that if you Google Hashtagify, it will let you put in a hashtag and see is that hashtag popular, and if not, like what other hashtags are being used in relation to that as well. And it's important to always check a hashtag before you do post it because you want to make sure it's not maybe connected to something that you're not speaking on. In terms of research specific versus general, I would say aim for around no more than 3 hashtags per post, and then try to keep one of those hashtags general and one of those hashtags specific. So say you want to tweet about International Women's Day, which is this Friday. Maybe one of your hashtags is the International Women's Day hashtag, but then the other one is specific and topical for your research. So family planning or, maternal child, newborn health, that sort of thing, to kind of draw that general audience in. Maybe they're interested, and then also connect with that technical audience as well.
Another question that's come up, how do you encourage researchers and experts at your institution to get on Twitter or any other platform for that matter?
Yeah, this is definitely probably something that any person working in comms is often going around and pleading with people to participate. I think at PRB we've been pretty successful over the past year in increasing our staff's engagement by, one, making sure that they know how to use the social media platforms in the first place, whether that's through hosting kind of like a brown bag lunch or taking 5 minutes during a staff meeting to talk about Twitter, just to kind of get rid of that fear of social media, especially in a professional context. I also would say that thanking people or showing their work when they actually do participate. So like today, in today's webinar, I tried to include examples of staff that we have who have participated online. Is a great way to let people know that they aren't just tweeting into a vacuum and that someone is paying attention to what they're doing. So whether that's resharing their posts, sending them an email and thanking them for posting about something, really encourages people to keep up the habit and, again, not abandon their accounts over time.
Well, I'm seeing one final question. Elle, you had asked about tips for organizations with limited design capacity. It looks like you're getting some great answers in the chat box. But Sydney, do you have anything to add? Canva has been suggested, and I personally use Canva, and I absolutely love it. But if there's anything that you use PRB that you'd like to share, that would be great.
Yeah, we also use Canva here at PRB. We have a design team, but they're also often like very slammed with actually creating design for our products that we produce. So Canva is great because it's easy to use. They give you templates, and I mean even our designers love using it because sometimes you're just kind of creatively exhausted. So it's great to look at a template and kind of see like, oh, like maybe this seems interesting, and then you can modify it for your purposes. Oh, I see someone else also wrote Adobe Spark, which I definitely agree is a great tool if you there's a free version, and then if your organization has an Adobe subscription, you can actually set it up so that it will automatically brand your visuals that you're creating in it.
Oh, well, we have one more question from Sherry. I think that will be our last question. Sherry, this is a great one. Is it worth it to create your own hashtag?
Yeah, so it depends. I see in your question that, for example, if you are hosting a 2-hour event or meeting, I would say for something like that, probably yes. Organizations, the example that pops into my mind is CSIS that hosts a lot of events. Having somewhere where people can go and talk about that event online is really great. So I would recommend creating it if you are hosting an event, especially maybe if it's a series of events. And again, kind of applying that general and specific rule. So encourage people to use the event hashtag, but then also um, have a general hashtag. And an example of when that can really is really needed. One of our researchers went to a UN conference in Bangkok last week, and there was no kind of hashtag to centralize the discussion. And that was kind of a struggle for her to be over there and be able to participate, but then not be able to kind of gather everyone around a particular place of conversation.
Okay, well, thank you, Sydney. Thank you, everyone, for the engaged and really thoughtful chat box discussion. So on behalf of Social Media for Global Health, I want to thank Sydney for her time. We heard some really interesting things today. Social media is something we can't ignore. It's a critical tool for academics and a way to get a competitive edge in your field. We heard that every social media platform serves a unique purpose, and most importantly, be yourself. Be the global health researcher, but also a person who has interests, likes, and dislikes. All really interesting topics. If you have any additional questions, the contact info of today's host, Sydney, was on the first few slides. You can also post questions on Twitter using the hashtag SM4GH or tweet at us at SM4GH. We'll post today's recording on the K4Health YouTube page in the next week or so. If you're not already a member of Social Media for Global Health, again, you can join our organization in the link in the first couple of slides or follow us. Our next webinar is March 21st. It will be with Fenton and J&J Global Health. They'll share their experience using Twitter polls as an alternative to Twitter chats. So it should be very interesting. Thank you all again, and I'm going to switch over to a different view. If you do want to download the slides, which I know, Susan, you had asked earlier, the link to do so is right now at the bottom left corner of your screen. Thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you, and hopefully you'll join us again on March 21st.